Today I'm creating a semi-stylized 3D model of a little wall-mounted shelf in Blender. I'm cluttering up the shelf with various decor items to give it a lived-in look. And I'm using a light academia style color palette to bring it to life. In this video, I'll share my thought process while modeling, and I'll share the various methods I'm using to create the different elements of this scene. So when I was collecting inspiration for this project, I kept gravitating towards country cottage style shelves. A lot of these shelves have various elements that I want to use in this project. So I'm going to try to Frankenstein some of my favorite elements into a custom wall shelf. I'm building the foundation of the wall shelf mostly out of cubes, and I'm softening the sharp edges. I'm going for a semi-stylized look, so I want the pieces of the shelf to feel ever so slightly rounded and give it a cute and kind of pillowy effect, like ever so slightly. So instead of beveling just the edges, I'm going to use the subsurface modifier since it rounds out the entire surface of the cubes. So I wanted to include these vertical shelves in my shelf design because I like the idea of placing a bunch of little knickknacks and things on them. Usually these types of vertical shelves are quite narrow and they're made to store decorative plates, and I've even seen papers stored in them. But I made the vertical shelves in this design a bit wider so that they can hold a variety of types of items. Since this is a wall-mounted object, the lower shelf would land at about hip height on a person. And so I want the lower shelf to jut out a little bit farther than the upper shelves. I feel like this would be more useful for somebody in real life to access the lower shelf more easily. But that also means I have to adjust the sides of the shelf accordingly. So I'm taking this opportunity to create a curved shape on the sides of the shelf and give it a bit of character. In real life, I have a bookshelf in my living room, and I like to place items on the very top of the bookshelf, but those items feel kind of precariously placed up there. So on the top of this 3D shelf design, I extended the sides and the back up a little bit so that items can be nestled up there and a little bit less likely to fall. And for the shelf, I want to experiment with a juxtaposition between the slightly chunky shape of the wall shelf and pair it with super delicate and dainty hardware. So I'm going with narrow drawer pulls and a shelf railing at the top. So at this point, I'm happy with the overall shape of the wall shelf, so I'm ready to move on to modeling the decor items. I'll start by modeling a jug and a glass bottle and some candlestick holders. I want a lot of control over the shapes of these round objects. And if you're curious what I'm doing, I'm creating the profile of the rounded shape that I want. And then I'm spinning it around 360 degrees to translate the profile into a rounded object using the screw modifier. This method kind of reminds me of a pottery wheel, where you press a tool into the side of spinning clay, and that one little move propagates to the entire circumference of an object. So this method's really easy to work with, and you have a ton of control over the shape with very little effort. I want the candle to look like it's been burned before, so I'm deforming the wax to have lumps around the edges, and I'm using a curve to make the wick look charred and bent like an actual burnt wick. Next, I want to add a trailing plant to the top shelf. I'm positioning the tendrils around the shelves so that they trail over the front of the little cabinet door, and I thought that would give the area a little bit more interest. And I also want one tendril to weave up along the top shelf around the decor items that will go here. I'm modeling a single leaf and using the particle system to duplicate it all over the faces of the plant tendrils. This plant is based off of the pothos plant. It's a pretty popular houseplant, probably because it's so low maintenance, and it's also a gorgeous plant. It comes in different variations of colors, and some of them are variegated, where they have two different colors marbled together. comment down below if you have one, or about any other houseplants you have. I had to give away all of my beloved houseplants, including my neon pothos, when I moved across the country, and I'm still so sad about it. I got some new plants since then, but I secretly miss my old ones. I want to fill out the top shelf with some more items so that I can figure out where the plant tendril can be placed. I think I want some more vertical height up here, so I'm going to model a row of books in various sizes. I actually have an entire video dedicated to creating book game assets, and I use the same method in that video to create these books. I want this scene to have a lived-in look, so I'm slightly rotating all of the books and tilting them in different directions so that they're leaning up against each other rather than having them all like perfectly aligned. At this point, I'm taking a step back and deciding that I want to add a few more items to the vertical shelves. I'm going to add some jars with twist-on lids and a vase to hold flowers. In real life, there are some flowers that form this kind of ball shape, and for some reason they remind me of little dainty wildflowers. So to create that, I'm starting with a sphere and displacing all of the vertices around to roughen up the shape of the sphere and make it look a little bit more organic instead of perfectly rounded. While I was designing the decor items that would go on the shelf, I was trying to think about who would live here and be using the shelf and what kinds of things they would store on it. I'm thinking that maybe they would have candlesticks that they would use on their dinner table, and maybe this person would go out in nature and pick wildflowers and collect herbs and things to put in little jars. I'm thinking that this person would be a big reader. Maybe they would read novels or enjoy cookbooks, and this would just be a place for them to store all of their little things on this wall shelf. I think I want to add some larger decor items to the bottom shelf just to balance out all of the smaller items above. I'm adding a lockbox as a larger grounding piece, and I'm placing a framed painting behind it to add some visual dimension. I'm adding little feet to the lockbox, but I feel like it still looks a little bit simple. So I'm going to add a plane and cut some holes into it with the intention of creating little embellishment pieces to go on the lockbox. The subsurf modifier keeps all of the edges rounded, and I'm mirroring the plane to the four corners of the lockbox, so I only have to model one. To be honest, I'm just winging it with this design. I have no idea what I want this to look like, but I do come back by the end to clean it up and adjust the design to make it a little bit less pointy. Then for the art frame, I'm starting with a plane, and I'm deleting the face of the plane, so that I'm just left with the edges of the plane. And I'm going to turn those into a curve so that I can add some geometry to the curve using a profile. It always takes a minute for me to wrap my head around which direction to move the vertices of a profile to get the shape that I want. But once I get it, using a curved profile is so fast. I also want to add a little lantern on this bottom shelf for some lighting. I'm just cutting out portions of a cylinder to make the frame of the lantern, and then I'm adding a smaller cylinder inside for the glass and placing a little candle inside. I'm also feeling like the right side of the shelf could use some more vertical height, especially to balance out the height of the art frame. I originally planned for the lantern to be enough, but I'm going to add another plant here. I'm modeling the leaves of this plant as if it will become more like eucalyptus type branches. And now I'm ready to add materials. I'm applying a wood color to the wall shelf, and then I'm creating another material for the brass hardware that I'm going to use as my metallic accents throughout the scene. I'm also making a glass material for the little jars and bottles, and also applying it to the lantern so that we can see the little candle inside of it. And And I'm coloring everything else with browns and tans and creams, and also a green color and a little bit of a light burgundy or eggplant color. This color palette is inspired by light academia, which is a style that I personally find so aesthetically pleasing. It has vintage and bookish vibes, and it's so cozy and elegant, and I want to bring those colors into this scene. To texture the painting, I want to use an image that blends in with the rest of the scene. I don't want it to have any bold shapes or colors. So I downloaded this free vintage painting and I'm applying it to a plane. And then to blend it in with the rest of the scene, I'm adjusting the colors of it. And I'm also adding a noise texture to blur out the detail of the painting. And it kind of creates the effect of brushstrokes, which works out. Now that everything has colors, I want to add some lighting and then decide if I want to revisit some of the textures. First, I want to light the candle that's inside of the lantern. For that, I'm adding a cone and giving it emission to create a nice glow in this scene. I also want the candle wax to look like it's glowing from the light, so I'm editing the wax material to have some subsurface scattering, so that the light comes through the candle wax a little bit. You'll see me adding a point light, but I ended up deleting that and ended up sticking just with the glow from the emission. And then I'm just adding area lights to light up the rest of the scene. I'm using one at the front of the scene to cast some overall diffused light onto everything. I'm adding another one to fill in light on the right side, and I'm using a brighter one on the left to add some dimension. I'm going with a solid color for the world background so that there aren't any shadows cast onto the background. And from here, I'm just going to make some final adjustments. The glass jars are looking a bit dark, so I'm lightening those up a bit. I'm also adding a soft procedural wood texture to the wall shelf. It's such a big item in this scene, and I wanted to add a little bit of variation to the wood color. And also, after getting feedback on social media, I added some variation to the hanging plant with a procedural texture to give the leaves a bit of a marbled effect. And finally, I adjusted a lot of the models to give everything a slightly more rounded look so it can match the rest of the scene a little bit better. In the end, I still see things I could tweak forever, but I'm happy with how it turned out. I think I'll make some more models like this in the coming weeks, so stay tuned for more videos and let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to know if you enjoy this style of video, where I provide a high-level overview of my process and how my 3D models come together. If you're a Blender creator and you saw any techniques in this video that are new to you, I hope I shared enough terminology so that you can search for tutorials on those topics. And I hope that I shared some examples of how these techniques can be used in various ways. And hopefully by sharing what I'm up to, it gives you some inspiration for your own projects, whether that's 3D modeling projects or whatever else you're interested in. I hope you enjoyed coming along with me as I created this semi-stylized 3D wall shelf scene in Blender. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.